Good evening and welcome to another edition of Nevada County Interviews. And I'm your host, Paul Minicucci. And it's my great pleasure today to have two of my favorite people in Nevada County. I have City Councilwoman Renette Senum from Nevada City and the editor of YubaNet, Pascal Fusshaler. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
And today we're going to be talking about the Occupy movement that started, of course, in Wall Street as Occupy Wall Street and has spread to some 2,000 cities worldwide. And we were going to sort of drill into this movement to see how, whether it has that kind of legs that is really going to create some change in this country, or whether it's just kind of a passing fancy. Be interesting to see how well folks stand up to New York winter. Mm-hmm. So first, we like to find out who you guys are. So Renette, are you from these parts?
I'm from these parts. I was raised in this county since I was 4 years old and spent my 30s away, kind of bouncing back and forth, and then came back here in '04, and next thing I know I was jumping into local sustainability, relocalization movements, and then local politics.
Right.
Yeah.
And you did, of course, have a great adventure up in Alaska?
I did back in '94, a little solo winter crossing that I actually learned some good lessons and still apply today.
Right. And so you've been on the city council since?
This is I'm going to my fourth year. Right. So at the beginning of July of 2012 is the end of my term.
Right. And any hint as you run again?
I actually, right now, I don't plan on running again.
Oh.
Yeah, but I do plan on staying very, very involved. But it's just that being limited to the 2-mile wide city parameters is actually, personally, is very difficult. Yeah. So it's, yeah, but I've loved my role as a city council.
And of course you were mayor.
I was mayor. I wore that hat for a whole entire year, and I kept saying I lost the coin toss.
You failed to show up at a meeting and you were elected
I
mayor.
volunteered. Yeah.
So Pascal, where are you from?
Oh, me. Well, for starters, I'm from Luxembourg.
Right.
Luxembourg. So let's define Luxembourg very quickly. Between Belgium, Germany, and France, normally even on Google Maps, there is a little L, and that stands for Luxembourg. And
right.
That would be where I'm originally from, but I've been here for 13, 14 years now, and started with Susan Levitt. We started YubaNet in '99.
Right.
That was before there was something called alternative media or independent media. Right. The time we called it the community website, and it still is a community website, but now of course we have fancier titles. It's now we are independent local media.
Yeah, and you're well known for your fire season watching and giving people the news about what's happening, because that was a big gap in how we learned anything here.
Yeah, there was a gap, and it's always nice to find a niche. And now I say that fire news is actually the gateway drug to get people to come to YubaNet for the rest. And you know what? It works. And so yes, I am shamelessly pushing the fire news, but now it's great because I have to actually give credit to the agencies, because it took a few years, but after a few years, they are actually now, instead of me calling and saying, hi, could I post that information? Now they're actually calling and say, hey, we have a fire. Mm-hmm. So now it's really good. It's good for the public. So
we're certainly glad you're here, you and YubaNet.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And well, by the way, I was at that meeting where they volunteered her.
Oh, and I see. So you could have stopped it, but you didn't.
I couldn't. I can just observe.
So we are going to talk about the Occupy movement, and of course it started in New York and has spread as some of the Arab Spring, and we were talking about the Europe summer, and here it is fall in New York and the United States. And Renette just got back from New York, and she has a very exciting video, and we're going to take a moment to watch a couple of minutes of the video. So if we've got that queued up, let's go to New York.
The Oakland brutality, this was just like the next night. And in about 5 hours, the day before this, they ended up just putting it all together, and you know, a few thousand people showed up. And the objective was to march to City Hall, but I had gotten wind too. I was actually at a protest workshop, how to peacefully protest, and they had said that they were going to try to take it to the streets,
Right.
and which means basically they weren't going to stay on the sidewalks. It was unpermitted, and so I just jumped in, and interestingly enough, I found the safest place in protest, believe it or not, is to be at the very front, and sometimes even in front of the front, kind of scouting, because you can kind of see the landscape if
Right.
police are coming, or an escape route. I mean, really, I don't like being in those kind of crowds, you know, under those conditions. So I got some amazing footage, and ultimately what they did do is they went to City Hall, went around the block a few times, and then they did take the streets and went through a movie set, kind of surprised the whole entire crew and extras on the sidelines. And you know, ultimately, I think what they're really trying to say is that you know, every time there's police brutality, you know, you're going to have these marches in other, you know, kind of sister cities. And ultimately, these Wall Street protesters are very intelligent, or the occupiers, I should say. They know that as long as they keep peaceful, they're going to win. Right. And so they actually have courses like de-escalation type of workshops, and how to, you know, creatively protest and you know, kind of keep things down and not violent, and how to also identify provocateurs and keep them in line.
Now, so while we're trying to figure out the technical difficulties of why we're not showing the video, let's talk a little bit about how is this structured. I mean, I know there's this thing called the General Assembly.
Right. So when I went there, I really wanted to see, is this for real? What is really happening here? Is it really going to stick, go beyond winter? And when I got there, I was quite shocked to see Zuccotti Park is a small block. And it's like, this is it? And it really looks like a Hooverville. Tarps and you know, tents and all different sizes, and it's just packed in. And once you get below the tarps and tents, it's very, very sophisticated. Over 70 working groups having meetings all day long. Then you have, you know, your media center, you've got your medic tent, you've got your library, you've got your sanitation department, your comfort department, all these different things. Then you have the open source media. They have, you know, massive, you know, screens going on and so on. They had generators until the NYPD took them away. And then they have in the evenings, these working groups go out and they will come back and report back at 7 p.m. They have General Assembly, and 1,000, 1,200 people will come together, and they will make decisions through consensus, using hand signals and using that human mic. And to me, that is the most exhilarating.
Explain for the people what the human mic is.
Well, the human mic, people, so I've heard some people say, well, you all sound like a bunch of zombies, and it's freaky and it's weird. It's like, well, it's actually quite brilliant. They were told they could not use any kind of amplified sound whatsoever. So they decided, okay, then I will use my voice. You will repeat it. If it's a big enough crowd, then they'll repeat it, and they'll repeat it until everyone can hear what this one person is saying. So it's an art form. I've seen ministers come in there, and they can't do it. Mm-hmm. They don't have the right cadence, and they don't understand the style. And you've got to be very succinct and on point. Don't waste a word. And so they would do this human mic thing, and what was so impressive is that it's so loud, and this unison voice will literally reverberate off, you know, like One Liberty building and all the Wall Street skyscrapers, and it's just, you know, echoing around, and you realize this one little tiny block, this what looks like a hobo camp, has an amazing concentrated amount of
And
power.
how many people would you say were there when you were there?
Well, you know, it's just people are coming in and out all the time.
Right.
A few thousand, packed. And then you have visitors, and on weekends it's crazy, and they've got drumming going. It's very loud, chaotic. It's amazing cross-pollination going on. Every age, background you can possibly imagine, very diverse. And people are questioning, which I did as well, are they going to be able to make it through the winter? You don't hear that question in the camp.
Right.
They're bound and determined. And they got hit hard by that snow. I mean, it caught them off guard as far as a lot of the tents aren't mountaineering all-weather tents. But boy, next morning after the snowstorm, in 2 hours, the place was completely cleaned up, and they were right back on track and even looking better. So they're not going away.
How aware would you say they are of the other protests? I mean, how do they keep up with the news?
Well, it's constant. I mean, in the evening at General Assembly, they have this big screen up, and they actually have a tweet going on. There's Twitter happening and input of information and so on. And everyone is aware of everybody, and everyone's there to step up. In fact, at the General Assembly, the first night I was there, they made a decision, because they have over $500,000 in 5 weeks have been donated. And they had, through general consensus, decided to send $20,000 to bail out some people from the Oakland protesters, and also send them 100 tents as well. And so they're very aware of each other. But separate, completely not, there's complete autonomy.
Now, Pascal, someone who's involved in the media, I was looking on the web to find out basically a little bit statistically what was going on in the early part of the protest, because as we know, the mainstream, so-called mainstream media was totally ignoring this. And by the way, a friend of mine said there's different stages to protest. The first is you ignore, then you make fun of, and then you try to co-opt, and then you finally, change occurs in that. So you have to get through the stages.
It's a variant on the Gandhi quote, yeah.
Right.
Well, I have to say that it started out, we got a lot of, I get a lot of Twitter feeds where I follow various things, and there's something called the local indie publishers, which is all the independent online publishers, and we have people that are in New York, and they were like, hey, this is something, this can be really, really big. And so from the get-go, we got these feeds from these independent news sources, and they would just come, and it would just go on, and they would go on every day, and they were actually there, and they were also, because there is now a live stream, there's a live video stream that you can watch, and they set it up, they helped out, set it up in the beginning, because we all were wondering, it's like, okay, first, what is it? And I have to say, I think we all did this, made a mistake, because we all went out and then we asked people, hey, what are you about? What are you protesting, or what do you want? And I think we didn't realize at the beginning that there was it's this really vast movement. It's all encompassing, and you have people that have it's very, very diverse opinions, and everybody has their own voice, and they all together are this movement. So I have to say it's really interesting.
And one of Douglas Rushkoff had said that anyone who says he has no idea what these folks are protesting is not being truthful. Whether we agree with them or not, we all know that they're upset about. We all know that there are investment bankers working on Wall Street getting richer, while things, for the most part, the rest of us getting tougher. And he says that this is basically the first example in the Internet age of true citizen democracy in action.
It is, and also it is also the use of media, of both social media, be that Facebook, be that Twitter, be that Tumblr, or streaming. And at some point it was compared to the Arab Spring. It was like, yes, just like the Arab Spring, but I think it's even different, it's even vaster, because the ramifications of Occupy. You have now Occupy movements in Europe, you have them here, of course.
Right. It inspired the world.
Yes.
It's like it reverberated back.
Yes.
Cities worldwide. We got word that we can now run the video that Renette took, and we'll start there if we can. And perhaps not. So where are we in this, to start this? Where are we?
Well, this is actually the beginning of the protest, and it's when they're still in the streets, and it was interesting. The police just kept trying to keep them actually on the sidewalks, and then they got to a point where they were able to get ahead of the police. And then all of a sudden I just heard this, take to the streets, and everyone just started taking a corner, and they escaped them. And then literally it was cat and mouse, and it's interesting, there are different positions. There are leaders, there are scouts, there are certain people who keep people in line, keep the provocateurs down, keep them under control. And so then then as you are in this protest, you actually go into the flow of traffic. They went into the 6th Avenue, and again through a whole movie set, which really caught the extras and the film crew. They were quite shocked. And it's very well organized. And I sat in one workshop for protests, and they really suggest creativity and color and art and dressing up as clowns and taking big, huge plastic sheetings of balloons and pushing them into the police in their riot gear. And as they're popping the balloons, they look like fools. And so it's but ultimately it's really important. And the occupiers understand they got to keep it peaceful. Yeah. We keep it peaceful, they're going to win all the battles and they'll win the war. Right. And they also know it's absolutely critical that they stay leaderless.
Well,
and that is like the golden path.
That was my next question. who are the leaders?
There are none. It's
So how
leaderless.
does it work? I mean, who appoints people to the General Assembly? Who appoints the committees?
What it is that you can start your own working group, and anybody can
So
join.
like an open space.
Totally, and you can you set the time. You're the point person, and you go. And then if you have something that's a big decision that might involve money, funding, or a big decision, then you take it to the General Assembly, and then all these people vote on it. And they're doing something called a spokes council. So they're going to have these working groups, then have like a spokesperson for each working group. So that way, you can't just have someone come in there and kind of stir things up. Just any Joe Blow schmo coming in, and it's.
But beside that, I mean, I once was involved with working with the San Francisco Meme Troupe, and they say they don't have a script, and they don't have a script writer. And actually, Joan, and I forgot her last name, who I studied with, was a script writer, and she said it's really hard to continue to have a leaderless organization function. So there must be, whether they're named or unnamed, there must be people with more influence than others, no?
Well, the gentleman who started it, who is an author and kind of came up with this concept, he's walked around there and nobody knows who the heck he is. And I mean, they understand about horizontal, not hierarchical. That's where the power comes in. Yeah. But I think ultimately, and it's an organic process. They are finding their way. But ultimately, in fact, I spoke at the General Assembly using the human mic. It was very exhilarating, and I just said, I skipped a city council meeting to be here because I know you're on the front lines of the first ever global revolution, and that's what this is. It's the first ever global revolution. And because we have now awakened, and we've been inspired by the world, and now the world is being re-inspired by us because we're finally awake. And I said, once you come here and we're in this incredible petri dish of humanity, get inspired, cross-pollinate, and once you do so, go back home and occupy your city councils and your supervisorial seats and your assemblies and so on, and go where the controls, the reins of control are. And I got an applause. Usually they do this, and I got that plus a big applause. But people are we're getting creative how we're occupying, and that's the discussion right now is being very creative with our
Now, as we know,
occupations.
one of the more vocal places in Occupy land is in Oakland. Yeah. And we did download a short video explaining the Oakland situation, and I think we may talk about Scott Olson and the tear gas canister and that. So let's roll that if we can.
I think everyone should see a few moments from the police crackdown of the Occupy Oakland demonstration. The police say that they cleared the demonstrators using non-lethal force, but a tear gas canister can be lethal if it hits you in the face. It's hard to see from this video exactly how this demonstrator was wounded, but if you doubt that the police were deliberately aiming at the protesters, watch this policeman when a group of protesters attempt to come to the aid of the injured person. Watch that again.
What happened? What happened? You got hit. You got shot. What's your name? Wake up. What's your name? What's your name? Shit.
Tear gas and so on, and they should not be thrown directly into people, into where they are. There should be a distance, and they certainly should not be shot in their head. And so, again, as long as the police continue this, we're going to continue to gain public support. And it's not most police; it's only a tiny little number. It really is.
Let's talk a little bit about the structure of the other side, because I mean I think there's a lot of understanding amongst the left that there's kind of a right-wing cabal out there that's headed up with Washington and bankers, and and that the police, of course, more or less bought off by the establishment one way or another. And in case of New York, I mean, there was that $3.4 million gift to the police department. It was pretty blatant, as it turns out. How organized is the Occupy movement? I mean, is it a concerted effort, or are these guys just surprised?
I think they are mostly, definitely, I would say for the first month, they were definitely surprised. It was like, okay, we can dismiss this. Okay, fine. So like, oh well, yeah, okay. So, a hobo sitting in our park. Well, we'll clean up the park and we'll be done. But what they didn't count on was the social media, I think.
Sophistication.
And the sophistication of the protesters who actually use it. And because it's true that you didn't see in mainstream media, you did not see anything about it. So as long, and there's this, okay, as long as it's not on the front page of the New York Times, did it really happen? Yeah, all of a sudden it was on the front page of the New York Times. And then that's when, plus everything was redirected, attention was redirected. And I believe that right now that actually the quote, the cabal, like you said, is actually not running scared, but they are definitely taking action to get. There is a movement to use either legal means or use police force or use environmental health department and say environmental health. Hey, you guys go in there and you can. Hey, it's. Sanitation, it's a public safety risk.
You know, actually, they were playing dirty because after there was this march on Wall Street in solidarity with Oakland, the very next morning, the NYPD came in there and said, sorry, but these generators that you have are actually against code, and they took them away, and they're like they're a fire danger. Well, at the same time, they took away all their fire extinguishers as well. But you know, I think what they don't realize is there's a resiliency and a determination, and these people who've gathered are into open source and really the collective genius. They know how to really contribute and not get caught up in it's my idea. And so within 2 days, they were already working on a plan, but in 2 days after the generators were taken, they had, people power, bicycles, and people were attached to batteries, and they'd already done an energy map of the camp where to logistically, strategically place the bicycles to do pedal power, and they're powering themselves up. And, every time they get whacked down, they supersede where they were before, and they're stronger and better.
Now, one of the things that's sort of interesting to me is, well, let's talk a little bit about the opposition, because I want to get your views on this. So some of the criticism is the goals are uncertain. Are the goals uncertain?
No, the goals, no, it's not about the goals. It's right now they're saying, well, you're complaining about everything. And my response is that's because the corruption and the level of greed is so deep and it is so broad, it hits every aspect of our lives, whether you're a student, a retired person, or a single mother. And we all have the right to complain because somehow this greed and really just complete corruption has affected us in our lives profoundly. But it all goes back to the same point, which is, government is in bed with, with Wall Street, and we've really lost our democracy. And ultimately, you get down to it, it's the same problem.
What do you think? Is this a movement that's about exposing greed in Wall Street, or is it about more mainstream stuff like healthcare reform? How much is which, do you think?
I think it's everything, and it's probably in equal proportions. It was mostly the greed on Wall Street, and then also the Citizens United decision is a huge part of this, because Citizens United, with all the money that can now flow into elections, into campaigns, etc., that's really a big part of it, because the corruption is only possible when there are people who are willing to give money and people are willing to take money. So giving the money, Citizens United really helped. Any corporation can now give unlimited funds to wherever and however they please.
They're people.
They're people.
Yeah,
because
that's right.
corporations are people. I mean, except in Texas, they haven't executed one yet, so it's probably not. But we have, there's actually now it's Jay Harris, Katrina Vandenheuvel from The Nation, Jay Harris, who's the former publisher of Mother Jones, and Jim Hightower, which we around here in this area know as the commentator. They are now they've set up a media project, and it's also this We the People campaign. We the People campaign is their goal is Citizens United, reverse Citizens United, get the money out of politics, which goes back to the greed. But then in the movement itself, I think from what I saw from the signs I see, both nationally and here locally, it's everything. It is corruption, it is corporate greed, it is
Corporate personhood,
corporate
Federal
personhood,
Reserve.
it is health, it is healthcare,
Healthcare.
it is cuts to education, it is cuts to any services, any programs.
Austerity
and,
measures.
And I think it is mostly a really, people are articulating their need to be heard because people actually feel that they absolutely have no voice, that nobody is listening to them, and be that nobody's listening to them in Washington, nobody's listening to them on the state level, on the local level, and nobody, the media, we weren't listening either. So,
Right.
hey.
There's been no representation whatsoever.
So, is it fair, as some people have said, to characterize the Occupy movement as the left version of Tea Party?
Nope.
Okay, so let's just discuss that. Why? What are the differences?
Well, I mean, it's. I mean, there are differences, but the thing is that when I was at OWS, it was a variety of people with a variety of backgrounds, and I think that's like, oh, this is the lefties, that was the more conservatives, and there are some differences. I mean, we're for more regulation and not deregulation, whereas the Tea Partiers, just want, kind of free, clear, free market. There are those differences, but I think we have more in common than not, and I think we really need to focus on that. And I think ultimately we look at the corruption and the greed and lack of transparency, and you're going to see a lot in common.
Let's talk about that a little bit, though. I've had many years of work in the legislature in Sacramento and been privy to how the two-party system works and the dysfunction that it has. I'm a little concerned that, you can get so cynical about parties that you can't effectively mobilize public change because you have to be there to vote. I remember meeting Ted Kennedy one time and talking to him about it, and I was upset because he had done, I can't remember what it was he had done, it was in the arts movement, and he said, I have to be elected in order to be there. So there are compromises everyone has to make in order to be there because districts are too big and there's too much, money involved in politics, the campaigns and so forth. So how are we ever going to, is it even possible? And I'll tell you where I'm coming from. A couple of weeks ago, John Trudell was here, and he gave an enormously inspiring speech that I just loved. And the one thing that I disagreed with him about was he said that he didn't trust the Occupy movement insofar as he said, well, these guys are really smart, the powers that be, and you think that they saw Egypt and they saw Europe and they didn't think this was going to happen here. They knew it was going to happen here, and they're manipulating this movement, and they're and so forth. I don't think so. I think the big guys were actually very surprised that this was boiling underground, and it is an indigenous movement with real authenticity and staying power. So, but the question I think remains, how does the Occupy movement believe as a social force it will be able to translate into political action? Or don't they?
I think they're just the same way than the people that were marching in Alabama. Just the same way then that women finally got the right to vote here after quite some time. What happened? People went on the streets, and people were on the streets, and they stayed on the streets until the system took notice, then tried to oppress them, then finally gave in, because it's a way to effect change. I don't think that the movement, from what I gather, from when I talk to people, they don't want to be elected, but they want their electeds to be accountable. They are not against the two-party system. Hey, it would be great if they had a multi-party system, but I want the elected people to really represent us and our values. And what struck me in the past weeks is that the movement actually, in the beginning you didn't see, for example, any American flags. And so it was very easy. It was like, oh yeah, those are just those are kids and anti-American, this and that. And now actually you see, not only do you see flags, but you see vets. I mean,
Lots of vets.
Lots of vets. And they're there, and it's like,
let's face it, they're the most, if there's any class of people in the United States today that's affected by what's happened, it's the vets. I
It's
mean,
the vets.
they
They've
come
been on the
home,
front
they
lines.
have, 20% of them have TBI. There's no, medical care for them.
Yeah. No hope
there's
of
no
a job.
jobs. There's no training. There's,
No
doom
help.
and gloom. And so naturally, I think they're going to be the first group to understand that they've been duped. And, here now is their opportunity to speak out.
It's not only the opportunity to speak out, but it's also their opportunity actually, because what did they do? Okay, they were sent to a war theater and they were told what to do. And now finally they have an opportunity to actually make their voice heard and to actually say, okay, here, I know what this is. I know what we need. And it's like, yeah, again, it's this representation. People are demanding representation. And technically, this is a democracy, so technically, people should be heard. You have a House of Representatives. Most people in both the Tea Party and the Occupy movement feel that the House of Representatives is not representative at all, but it's just co-opted either by industry interests or by political or financial interests. And I think that's where the Tea Party and the Occupy movement, that's what they have in common. Otherwise, as far as political goals, I don't think that. Does Occupy actually have a political goal to affect? They don't want a constitutional amendment, as far as I know. Maybe some. I haven't heard it yet.
Let me ask you a question, because, I was in politics, so I get a little cynical. The reason corporations are people, is because the Supreme Court that was put in by a Republican administration made that ruling. Okay, and if you don't have the President of the United States, you don't have the Supreme Court. So you have to be, to me, very careful about how we go from here forward, because we could very well, if we cut off Obama, let's say, and he continues to float to the right, as it seems obvious he has been, then we'll end up with even worse Supreme Court folks. And so for me, there's got to be some connection. Otherwise, those kinds of rulings will continue, and we'll find ourselves further behind.
There has to be work within the system.
Right.
There has to be work within the system. But I think that what Occupy actually does is put pressure on the system to actually stem this tide of drifting off to one side towards the special interest side. I think that the movement is actually pushing back. It's like a wave that's pushing back. It's like, hey, government is there to serve the people. Yep. And the people, first, here you have some fundamental values. And the values are education, they are healthcare, they are respect of people, and representation. And so that, I think, is what, I think that they really want to work within the system.
Yeah. Now, we're going to go to local politics, because politics are all local, as they say. And we do have some JPEGs that have come off of we took from Ubinet today. Thank you to Ubinet for posting those. And no, that was
that looked like it was part of my video.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll get it straightened out. Do we have that video? All right. Well, let's go to New York City again, and hopefully we can get that video done first.
No.
Oh, no New York City. Okay. So let's go to the JPEGs that we have that came out of Grass Valley yesterday.
What happened?
No?
No. Nope.
Okay. Well, this is an
we'll use it to our
advertisement
imagination.
for the viewers to understand that we're severely underfunded, and would they please? No, I can't go there. One of the things I did want to bring up, and I don't know whether this was discussed in Occupy movement, but one of the more fundamental real questions on the table right now is about the media, and is about things like access media, because we are being forced into retirement by tactics that come down. I won't be too specific here, but let's suffice to say there's about 1/3 fewer access TV stations in the country today than there were 4 years ago, and I think from our perspective, the change that we made into being a digital media center wasn't a political thing, because we're concerned about activating everybody's opportunity to speak in the community, and to not only activate it, but to encourage and to give the tools to people so that they can actually compete in this media age, because that's what it's really about. You know, the ability to compete. I mean, if you have a unprofessional crew, and you have, standard definition, and you don't have HD and so forth, you are not going to compete. So that's why we're moving as we are to try to upgrade and to try to get HD here, because it's what's required. I'm not sure how many people understand how at risk this kind of media is, the independent media.
I'm sure that they're not, but I have to say, I think social media is forcing the hand of journalism as we see it today, and that's exactly what happened with Wall Street. Is that personally, I was Facebooking it the first week, saying, "Why isn't this being covered? Why isn't this being covered?" And finally, when it did get covered, it's just being jeered at and mocked. But I think social media is forcing journalists to do their job, and because things are getting out there on tweets before you ever see it in a newspaper. So we're forcing their hand. I think cable access television. No, there's definitely power out there undermining it, because they don't want that conduit to the public to have their right to free speech, basically.
Right. Because when you think about it, what the mistake mass media has done is to centralize.
Yes.
They bought up everything. Now
That's
they
a
have
mistake everywhere.
This national, and it's what I call the mallization of media. You don't know whether you're in Dubuque or South Carolina,
true.
and so which provides a perfect opportunity to go under the radar, in a sense, and have more local media, authentic media.
Yes.
And you'll see more of that coming, because we're going to be starting a lot of what we call networks, NINGs, about issues, and in fact, we're going to, I hope, this will come as a surprise to my board because they don't know that, but I'm probably going to do a NING about Occupy movement,
right,
so that we can really have a centralized place where people in this community can pick up videos, put videos, to allow people to comment 24 hours a day on what's going on instead of having it once a week. So I don't know. So we're not getting JPEGs either. Is that correct? Okay. That's okay.
All right.
What is the role? Let's talk about Mayor Quam in Oakland, and she seems like a reasonable lady, and has a pretty good progressive track record. But yet, what happened? She got outflanked by the police in Oakland. Talk about that. What do you think happened there in Oakland?
It's just, to me, indicative of the militarization of our police force. I mean, it's really come to light now that, and again, it's not all police, but these folks look like they're really dressed up for war, and it was a heavy hand. And I've been seeing sheriffs and police and other military men and women saying this is wrong. This is not what they are meant to do, or we are meant to do. And I don't think she really had a choice in it. I think there's this kind of black military. It's almost like black water that is suited up to really oppress. And there's a huge backlash that is rising because of this. And I think that they're going to be changing their tactics quite quickly. But every time it happens, we have to, again, stay peaceful. But numbers, I mean, that's why I went to New York City. I saw the police brutality there, and I said, get me a ticket. I'm going. And I plan on going down to Oakland as well. Right. Every time that happens, I plan on being another body in the street.
But I think that, again, it's the militarization of protest management, as it's called these days. It's called protest management, and it's militarized. But why is it militarized? Because there is enormous funding that is coming from, amongst others, from Homeland Security. And it's everything now can, under the guise of Homeland Security, you can do a lot of things. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. On this Saturday, I'll be somewhere in the Stanislaus National Forest, where the Christmas tree for the White House will be cut, and they will then transport it first to Sonora, and then it's going to go on a tour, and eventually it will end up as the Christmas tree in front of the White House. And so the media is invited to be there when the tree is being felled, etc. Once they made it public that it was in the Stanislaus National Forest, there were concerns, national security concerns. So that tree, which is one tree in a stand of 300, has now been monitored 24/7, and apparently there have been some very funny instances of things happening. But so that is Homeland Security funding. On the other side, you have Homeland Security funding for command-type vehicles for local police and sheriffs that are complete and utter overkill. Let's take Nevada County. Nevada County, our sheriff, has applied for a grant because they don't have enough funding, because our supervisors all believe in mostly believe in small government, less taxes. So they applied for a grant, and they got a grant for a command vehicle. We have a really great command vehicle. It looks apparently like a NASCAR trailer. I mean, it's the same size. It's outfitted with the latest command equipment and transmitters, etc. You know that this is Nevada County. It does not have four-wheel drive. So it's that type of waste that is these gadgets that are being pushed on by defense contractors. Because defense contractors will take something that has been used in a war, they will slightly downgrade it, and then it's going to find its way into the hand of police. And you know what? There are some policemen that don't have enough training, and some of them are just not paid enough to do the job that they're supposed to do, because I give them that it's really stressful to have a couple thousand people come at you and, hey, we just want to do this, and their job is to technically protect everybody, both the protesters and the public that is not demonstrating. But what happened in Oakland, I believe, is just an overreaction that comes. It reminded me a lot of things that were happening in Paris, because I saw what is called the CRS, they call them the Republic Safety Troops. These guys, they are locked up in their vans. They were locked up for 24 hours in full battle gear, and then they let them out. And it's normal. They just react. They have been locked up for hours. They will go out and they will go at the protesters. And I think that's what happened in Oakland. And then all of a sudden, police was overwhelmed. And that's when they react the way they reacted. And that's when something happens. And that's when you have one guy throw a flashbang at people trying to help another protester that is already injured. It's overwhelmed. It's lack of training, lack of funding, and lack of preparation.
In what sense do you think that they were overwhelmed? What do you mean by that?
I think
just numbers, or
no? I think they were overwhelmed because, let's face it, how many times in the past 10, 20, 30 years did we have mass demonstrations when they did not know what to expect? Was it going to be another Seattle where you had people that would be there that would advocate violence, or would this be a peaceful protest? They didn't know what to expect. Insecurity normally breeds fear, and cops are people too. So okay, I think they were afraid, and then they lashed out with the tools at their disposal, and it was complete and utter overkill.
In New York City, it's a little different in that, there's been now quite a few articles and reports about how Wall Street has literally hired on their books the NYPD. And so there's a certain percentage that are wearing their blues, and they've got their badge and their gear, and they don't work for NYPD, and they don't work for the public. They work for Wall Street. But from what we can tell, they look like an NYPD officer. So there's a variation, I think, depending on the city of what's going on. There, it's just literally some police, and again, it's a small percentage, are the corporate thugs. They're for hire.
Let's talk locally. What's your view of what's going on here in Nevada County? There's been 4 protest marches once a week on Wednesdays, I guess.
Wednesdays.
And they were twice in Brunswick, once in Nevada City, once in
Twice in Nevada City.
No.
Yeah, they've had it on the bridge, and they've had it, didn't they?
No,
I'm sorry.
no.
Okay,
That's
sorry.
right. So,
thank you.
What's going on here? How related to, and the reason I bring it up is when the pictures that you showed is a different crowd. I mean, these are older folks for the most part, I think, here, and
not yesterday. The crowd
Is that right?
from Wednesday. What I noticed were more young people were there, but yeah, it's true. It's an older crowd. The difference, I think, first there is no permanent encampment. Nobody has yet figured out that there's really a nice big green lawn in front of the Root Center. Not that I'm giving anybody ideas, but I'm just
wouldn't do that.
wouldn't want to do that. But there is this nice long lawn. But we have every Wednesday.
It's convenient because it's right near the jail.
But you know what? They have really nice bathrooms in the Root Center,
Yeah.
so it helps. Every Wednesday, and for the mailing list, they just announced that they will keep it going even throughout the winter. It's a rotation, so it was Brunswick Basin this Wednesday. It's going to be Nevada City next Wednesday, and then Grass Valley. It's a different crowd. Yes, it's older people, young people now coming out more and more. I estimate about 400 people were there yesterday, and it's different because it's the local flair, and it's the same thing actually is going on in other cities and other smaller communities. Mm-hmm. The small communities come out because it's in solidarity with Occupy Wall Street, but then there's also very local concerns. Mm-hmm. Now you have people that will the big theme was change your bank, transfer your money,
okay.
Which is coming up on November 5th.
Mm-hmm. Corporate personhood's another big
Corporate
one here.
personhood is another one.
GMOs, food rights, another big one for this area. So I think you use it as a platform to be able to cry out your local issues and find solutions. I know there's a lot of people who are working on, okay, how do we deal with the corporate personhood? How do we deal with GMO labeling? So there's a real behind the scenes activity going on that goes beyond just the Wednesday protest.
Now, earlier off camera, we were talking about going beyond just sort of an Occupy.
Oh, okay.
I'm being told that we now have the clip working in New York, so let's try that, and we'll get back to the local.
Yeah, this is not Nevada City Grass Valley. As soon as it happens, they're like, shame, 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 or who do you work for? Provocateurs, who they were able to identify, they'd shame them out of the protest. There were people who were trained to keep the protest tight and the provocateurs down. There's two gentlemen.
Do you think there are paid provocateurs? And who's paying them?
I would probably say Wall Street more than likely.
And
I actually chased two down because there's two that were ID'd. I don't know how, but they were yelling provocateurs, provocateurs, and I ran behind them for about a minute saying, "Who are you? Who do you work for? Who are you serving?" And they were literally like this with this, "Get me out of here." They were totally.
It reminds me of the Pinkerton movement.
Yeah, and Wall Street Journal, journalists, have been pushed out as well when they're identified. It's a very powerful thing, and so everybody just kind of takes part, and so it was really a wild and woolly game, cat and mouse game with the police. But basically, we made it back to Zuccotti Park with I think maybe 12 arrests, and that was about it. And it was something I've never experienced before.
So now we're going to take a look at the local JPEGs that are pictures of our local. So we have a couple. Pascal, tell us.
That's from those. So those are from yesterday, Wednesday.
Right. And how many people were there?
I would say close to 400, if not more. I had to at some point when I left. There were still people coming on, and yes, that's the Howard Zinn quote. Of course, dissent is the highest form of patriotism.
And again, a lot of the people who are holding these signs are, I would say, older than kids.
Older than kids.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's indicative of our area.
But it's pretty typical of our area,
yeah.
and. But actually, there's something that happened yesterday that was really, it was something new, something I hadn't seen yet. people are standing there on the corners. They are the four corners of the Brunswick and Sutton intersection, and all of a sudden you had the people that work at the local Quiznos came out with their hands with sandwiches cut up, etc. And they're like, "Hey, we are here. We have to work, but we really support what you're doing. Please, this is our way of supporting." So they went around, passed out sandwiches, what everybody really appreciated. But this is the first time that you had businesses come up that actually then participate in quite a visible form.
Yeah, here you can see how, a little bit bigger shot back.
That's that's around
And
5:30. That was around 5:30. Yeah, that's about 5:30.
Were there police around?
Yes, the Grass Valley Police Chief was single-handedly policing the whole thing, and yes, he walked around and said hello to everybody, and that's because it is very different
Yes.
to the big city
Very
protests.
Right.
You have maybe one or two of our local cops that are there, and they are probably doing other things. They are probably checking messages, etc., and they're just walking around and like they say, well, hey, we're just here to make sure that everybody stays on the sidewalk. But the local movement does that themselves, and so now they know that, and they're there just in case. But it's definitely it's a very different feel.
Where do you think the local movement is headed?
The best way to find out, I think, is to go to Pioneer Park on Sundays and to go to there, because they have adopted the same principles. So there's the General Assembly every Sunday. So it's there, and where they are headed, they have now decided to actually go on rain or shine throughout the winter. So that's going to be interesting. And they are thinking of maybe having some themes, so that if you want to come dressed up, yesterday we had some people who were dressed up as the 1%. They were there, and but they also it's the same organic flow than in Oakland or in New York. It's the same organic flow, and I don't think that there is where they are going would imply a certain structure. I just think that it's really it's going to be people driven, and it's going to be interesting to see, because now we have, after all, let's be cynical here, but we have an election season coming up. So it's going to be interesting to see who's going to try and either co-opt the movement or
Mock
mock it. I mean, that's going to be, I think, the next phase.
Yeah, and I actually push for, we have all these parks closing down, Malakoff Diggins and Bridgeport, and even South Yuba River South Yuba River Park, and I personally think we now have empty buildings in need of people and people in need of buildings, and I think that we need to start occupying them. They're occupying foreclosed homes, and I think that we need to get a lot more creative and really say, okay, where is this hitting us in the heart, and where can we occupy that really has an impact and has stacked benefits, as a matter of fact. And I think we should really be strategic in where we occupy to get the word out there. And because the truth of the matter is, as an elected official, I really feel at this point in time we need to continue rattling cages and saying we're not going away as long as we have no opportunities, we have no hope, we have no retirement, no chance of a career as a student, or all of these things. What better do we have? We're not going to have a paid job. At least now we have a purpose.
Right, and I think part of the student anger is, you're coming out with $70,000 in debt from the very same people.
With false promises.
Yeah, and who are getting bailed out, and, as you pointed out, they're not going to get Social Security if they never pay their debt back.
That's right.
Unless something changes. And, so they're really under the gun, these young folks. And it's no fun coming, I remember myself coming out in 1969, we were in a little bit of a recession, and there was not a lot of fun looking for jobs at that point. We have a couple of minutes left. When do you think we'll see counter-protests, or will we?
Counter-protests to what?
Well, Tea Party folks showing up on Wednesday afternoon.
You may agree or disagree with the Tea Party, but I think actually that they have a rather strong emphasis on First Amendment and free speech, so it would be very hypocritical of the Tea Party to show up and protest the protesters.
To say, we can protest, but it has to be what we support.
But I really don't think that at least locally, on the local level, I don't think it's going to happen. I think that they might disagree with a lot of things that the Occupy people say, but I don't think there's going to be counter-protests. I don't see it locally. I see that probably, again, in the bigger cities, we have the provocateurs that are already in there, and they are definitely, they're not probably from a party. They are not from one single party. They're probably from companies, yes. But I don't see the Tea Party and the Occupy movement come to blows, because it would help neither.
There has actually been some Tea Party leaders saying that
Yes,
they totally
are.
support
They
this.
actually support that.
And they don't like the violence they're seeing as well, and
Right.
we have the right to protest and to assemble. And ultimately, my feeling is if we're really, really smart and strategic, we would stop this division
Yeah.
and we would come together.
Right.
And even, you know, it's just
So
we
I
agree to
think there's a lot more
disagree.
commonality
Yeah, we
than
agree
there
to
are
disagree on
differences.
certain things, but there's certain things that we agree on, and if we all come together on that and become, you know, work on one page, we're going to be this incredible force to be reckoned with.
Right.
So I think this division, we realize, you know, divide and
Kind
conquer.
of a false division.
Yeah.
Well, we're about out of time, so I want to thank my guests, Renette Senum
Thank you, Paul.
and Pascal Fusaler. Thank you for coming down here and joining us, and I'm sure we're going to have you back, because it's going to be an interesting movement to follow in the next couple of months. That's about all we have time for today, folks. So we'll see you next time. This is Paul Minicucci saying bye-bye.
In today's economy, I check my credit annually. You can do it too for free. Under the law, it's guaranteed. AnnualCreditReport.com, the one you can depend upon. Other sites may turn your head, they say they're free. Don't be misled. Once you're in their tangled web, they'll sell you something else instead. AnnualCreditReport.com, the one you can depend upon. All the others charge a fee. Read the